pray. Father, would you help us this morning? We appreciate all you do for us. Holy Spirit, would you lead, would you guide, would you open our hearts so that we can behold wondrous things out of your law? We sure do appreciate all you do for us. We love you. Amen. All right. So who remembers what topic we've been discussing the past couple of weeks in church? I'm sorry, I'm going to make you think this morning. Who remembers what that word is? Grace. But that's been up there on and off. Okay, you guys are either cheating or remembering. You know that actually means something. Half the time, you can't even get people to think. Thanks, Bob. We'll make you remember it somehow. So the struggle of teaching is to explain fact, truth, or concepts in such a way as to impart knowledge at a level the student can grasp it, so the student now has the knowledge or understanding as part of his tool chest and can apply it and use it after the lesson how it was intended to be used. How many of you have ever gotten to teach a class? Raise your hand. So if you've gotten to teach a class, who's generally the one who learns the material the best? The teacher. The problem is the teacher isn't trying to learn it the best. They're trying to get the student to learn it the best. And the problem in teaching and pastoring is you guys are the ones we need to really grasp this so we can help you with the struggles you're struggling with. This is helping us in studying for it to help us with our struggles, but we want to help you and help you change stuff in your life to be where you want to be and the Holy Spirit has led you to be. I believe the struggle Christians have today is the willingness to understand truth and then successfully exercise that truth in order to accomplish maturity how God intended us to. One of the biggest areas in which we haven't completely understood and exercised ourselves spiritually is in the area of grace. We've been discussing it the past few Sundays. I'd like to try to help explain it further so the application and exercise of it can be helped. So for my understanding, grace means two separate things to us today, the way we try to understand it. One way is the grace to me from God. Means God has allowed Christ to be the offended party. How was Christ offended? By our sin. God has allowed Christ to be the offended party who has forgiven us of the offense as the only mechanism by which God and us can have a relationship. So grace is God's willingness to allow Christ to be the one that bears the offense so that you and I can have our relationship with God repaired. Because someone had to pay the punishment, pay the penalty for sin. Well, God allowed Christ to bear that punishment, to bear that penalty. So Christ was the instrument or tool of grace for us. The easiest illustration is that of a credit card debt for me. So what we have set up is the ability to spend offenses on a credit card, and someone else has agreed to be responsible to pay for the credit card. How many of you have a credit card? Am I going to cause marital strife by asking, is there a spender that doesn't really care for the numbers on the credit card? At least one person's admitting offense there. So one person pays for the credit card, the other person uses the credit card, right? And sometimes the person who uses the credit card doesn't understand how much they put and the person that pays for their credit card is looking at it like, how can you not? You spent all this money. So to me, that's the same way we look at grace today. Sin is where we can spend on the grace credit card because we know somebody else has already agreed to pay for it, right? Someone else has agreed to pay for your sin. I can live in my sin and it's going to be okay. Does someone still have to pay for it? Is it forgiven? It is forgiven, but there's still a penalty involved, right? There's still a payment that had to be made. We'll get to that in a minute. One method of getting around paying for the credit card debt that is voluminous is to file bankruptcy. And that's how we live today. We act as if we can just file bankruptcy. We can continue spending and spending and spending because at the end of our life, we're just going to file bankruptcy and those charges are just going to disappear and we're not going to be responsible for them anymore. And that's how most of us understand grace in our life. It's not how God designed it. That's not how it is. But that's how we look at it and view it. As if God has taken our bill of sin and said, I will pay no matter what the charge, but we don't have to ever attempt to live holy lives. God has covered all of our sin, but he didn't intend for us to never attempt to live a holy life after we accept him. Did Christ do away with the law needing to be followed? Ultimately, that's the discussion people today have. The law's gone. We don't have to follow all that law. Okay, let's look in the New Testament at what Christ had to say about it. Matthew chapter 5. Everybody turn to Matthew chapter 5. Verse 17. Matthew 5:17. The Bible says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Does Christ say the commandments God put into effect are null or void now that Christ has done his work? Are they done away with? No, just a payment's been made for them. See, they had to, in those days, offer a sacrifice, acknowledging their sin and that it needed a payment, and that sacrifice was the payment in those days. Christ became the sacrifice. Did he say the law was gone, though? We want to live in the world today and just have just a little bit of similarity between Christ and us so that we can feel okay ourselves. We want the outward appearance. I don't believe that's how Christ intended grace to work. What was Christ's work? What did he come here to do ultimately? He came here to, that's why we have a cross, came here to die. That was his work. He didn't ask us to die. He asks us to live. Christ restored fellowship so we could have a relationship with God again. Our issue is we accept the gift, but don't acknowledge that there should be any more we need to do. That's where we leave it. We just accept the gift, and that's where we walk away. Let's look at Romans chapter 6 and verse 1. Brother Cassidy covered this a couple times. Romans chapter 6 and verse 1. Paul's writing to the church in Rome. "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound?" What's the answer? It's verse 2. God forbid. Grace is not the freedom to live any way I want, but the relationship restored with God to be empowered through him to have victory over sin. Let's look down at verse 11 of Romans chapter 6. "Likewise, reckon ye also yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey it in the lust thereof." God commands us to not let sin reign. Romans 6 is Paul's argument with the Romans because they continue to struggle very much with sin. Christ, through Paul, commanded them to yield their members unto God. We'll get to the practical application of that at the end. I mentioned there were two different kinds of grace in how we view it. The second grace is from, it's not really different, but you'll hear in a minute. The second grace is from you to others. Now we're going to turn back to Matthew chapter 5. So the first grace and how we view it today is from who to us? From God to us. The second grace, how we view it today, is from us to others. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. We're going to read down through verse 48. The Bible says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away. Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. I think this is one of the verses we struggle with today and just think there's no way I can possibly do that, so I'm not even going to try. And that's why we go back to living our worldly life the way we would like to live it and not try, because we look at it and say, that's impossible. Be therefore perfect, even as your Father which in heaven is perfect. And the reality is that word perfect doesn't mean never sinning again. It means the attitude of trying to be a mature, complete individual yourself, trying to live kind, merciful, gracious lives. So when somebody offends you, we just read the end of Matthew chapter 5, where if somebody offends you, you be kind to that person. If they're trying to take something away from you, give them more. If they're trying to force you to go a certain amount of distance with them, go with them double. If you're treating your friends good, everybody can do that. But it's when you treat your enemies good that God's grace is seen, because no one recognizes that as normal. Because the way God treats us, his grace is not normal. That's not how you and I live. That's not how we expect others to live. God's grace to us says, I know you've offended me, and I'm still going to be good to you. I know you've hurt me in my cause with other people, and I'm still going to be good to you and your family. I know you've said this about so-and-so. I'm still going to be good to you. I know you've broken my commandments and my laws. I'm still going to be good to you. That's God's grace. And that's what he's asking you to live. And that's what he's asking me to live. So-and-so's offended you. Perfect. It's an opportunity to show God's grace to them. You've been hurt by this person. Great. Forgiveness. That's your opportunity to show that person God's love through you to them. It's the hardest part of the Christian life to live. Christ is instructing the multitude how they should treat each other. Matthew chapter 5. What is Matthew chapter 5? It's called the Beatitudes. Somebody's going to be thinking this morning, right? Someone's going to put their brain in gear and say, okay, I'm going to try to think what he's saying. What's the question? Okay. What is Matthew chapter 5? Beatitudes. Christ is instructing multitudes how they should treat each other. Not how one should expect another to treat him, but how we should expect ourselves to treat someone else. That's the difference between our understanding of grace and the actual meaning of grace. You can't go around saying, I expect you to treat me like this, because you're not a Christian if you don't. God isn't looking at them and their treatment of you and expecting your behavior based on that. He wants your behavior to show them, this is who I am. I am being God. When someone offends you and you're gracious to them, they're going to look at you and say, what in the world, where did that come from? When someone plays an awful trick on you, if you're in my class, you know what that means. You be gracious, not offended. You be kind. We'll leave that right there. So let's review the word perfect. The word perfect, synonyms: finished, complete, pure, holy, mature. The idea of a tool constructed that is complete and ready to be used. Not this word that is unreachable, unattainable, and there's no way possible, so I'm not even going to consider what that means and what context in which it was. But it's practical. It's a tool ready to be used. You're part of this body of believers. You're supposed to be a mature, complete part of this body, ready to be used so you can fulfill your role in this church. That's what God calls us to do. If you're going to continue being immature, incomplete, and be happy in that, you can't be used to the potential that God has given you. He's asking you to stop being immature and stop saying, I want everybody else to treat me this way before I'm going to treat anybody else like this. I want everybody else to be kind to me before I'm going to be kind to somebody else. He's looking at you saying, you be the kindness, you be the mercy, you be the grace, and you show everybody else around you how I am asking you to live. That's Christ's instruction in Matthew chapter 5. God is commanding us to get to a completion in our behavior towards each other to reflect how he loves us to others. You are the greatest evangelistic tool that this church has. You, yourself, in your circumstances, treating people the way God asked you to treat them. That's the greatest evangelistic tool possible for us. Our response today instead is leave me and my immaturity alone. That's what we claim as grace, instead of you being right in the way God expects you to treat everybody else around you. Those are the two options that you have to weigh, and which one am I going to accept as the definition of grace? Leave me and my immaturity alone, today's society's interpretation, or I am going to be kind, gracious, truthful, merciful, and honest in my treatment of others, as the way God intended you to live out grace. Which one do you get to choose today? What our response should be is, what do I need to do in my life such that by doing it forces me to live godly, holy, and striving for maturation or maturing? What God has done is said, I'm actually not telling you to compare yourselves to how complete another man is, but how to use my maturity, God's maturity, his completeness and holiness as the goal. Are you ever going to attain God's ability or God's measure of completion? That's why he asks you to compare yourself and your living to him. Because he is kindness, he is love, he is grace, he is mercy. And he's asking you to start being mature like I am. Stop expecting everybody else around to treat you good and be gracious to you before you're going to be gracious to another person. But rather, show the love of Christ in taking your offense and being gracious to you. That's how we're supposed to live out grace. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 45, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. How does God treat the evil? Just like he treats the good. How does he treat the just? Isn't that why we're saved? Because he treats all of us good, in spite of our failings, in spite of our flaws. God's challenge to us is to be what we are first, not how our circumstances treat us first. I imagine every one of us could say, I've had a bad rap. This person treated me awful. This person was unjust to me. This circumstance in life was awful. It was horrible. And I imagine if we actually heard it out, we'd agree. That was bad. It wasn't good. But the challenge is, now who are you going to be in response? Are you going to be like Christ? Or are you going to let the flesh win out this time? Is that going to be your reaction this time? We are supposed to be kind first, not only be kind to those who are kind to us. We are supposed to be merciful first, not only merciful to those who we think deserve mercy. Be therefore perfect. The idea of maturity is that no matter the circumstance, We are who we're supposed to be. You see a kid that is behaving outside of his years, and you look at that kid and say, man, that kid is mature. He's acting older than his age group is. That's perfect that God is asking us to do. And instead of just what we expect each other to do compared to how good God is. That person is mature, acting above their spirituality. They're being like Christ. That's the idea of perfect. Be ye therefore mature, complete. Allow God to use you to the fullest that He's put inside you. The most opportunity for use, a complete tool, holy, mature, that's the idea. So with this concept, let's read the Beatitudes. With the concept that Christ is expecting us to be like Him, Matthew chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 1. And seeing the multitudes, He went up into a mountain, and when He was set, His disciples came unto Him. And He opened His mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the first one, blessed are the poor in spirit. He wants people to be poor in spirit first. Not, okay, my surroundings are comfortable. I can now not think of myself more highly than I ought to. He wants you to approach your circumstance with the concept, I'm going to treat myself less than what I would like to, poor in spirit, first. Not, okay, the circumstance is okay to do this. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So we're thinking this concept, this is what Christ and God are asking me to be, independent of what the circumstances around me are. I want to be poor in spirit. I want to be mourning my sin, mourning the condition that my flesh is, mourning the fact that I struggle with it so much. I want to be meek. I want to be hungering and thirsting after righteousness so I can be filled. I want to be that first, not, okay, my circumstances allowed me, so now I can be. You're never going to have a circumstance that allows you to be holy. We live in a world that does not desire holiness. Blessed are the peacemakers. When you come, do you bring peace as a part of who you are? Or do people wait for you to leave so they can have peace? God's asking us to bring the peace with us and to be the one that provides peace. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I get the idea when Christ is saying this, blessed are they that are persecuted for my name's sake, that He's saying, this is exciting. You have an opportunity to represent me in this situation. I mean, you don't always get that opportunity. We spend a lot of time with each other. We're supposed to treat each other right. We don't always get to show the love of Christ to people outside of the church. You get the opportunity, someone treats you wrong, it's a great opportunity for you to show the love of Christ to them. They got to see something different, and not just for different sake. We're not just trying to live different lives so people can say, oh, they're different. We're trying to live a life that is kind, that is gracious, that is merciful, so people can recognize the difference, and then we can explain to them it's actually the love of Christ. I can't claim any of this. I'm not responsible for it. It's Christ in me, the hope of glory. That's all this is. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. You get the idea that Christ is saying, living out kindness, living out grace, living out righteousness, it's exciting. It's not a dread when somebody mistreats you. It shouldn't be a horrible thing that you got to go tell everybody about. It's an opportunity to show Christ in me. I get the opportunity to be kind to somebody that treated me wrong. What a privilege that is today. I know it sounds foreign and strange, But that's how Christ set it up for us. 1 Peter chapter 4. I'm going to turn to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding joy. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. For the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. What a strange concept for us. Rejoice in the opportunity to represent Christ the way he did for you. Christ in me. And it's not about me. If you are the one getting the credit for it, it's been done wrong. It's the credit supposed to go to Christ. And we're supposed to be mature enough not to seek the credit. Verse 17. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? It's a pretty sobering verse. Read it with me. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. Who's he looking at to be mature? Us. We're the example. We're the ones where they're going to come for judgment first. Are you being perfect? Not in the never sinning again, mature, complete tool that God can use. The application. Our biggest issue in pursuing God and acting out what he has commanded us to do and be is not taking the actions necessary to be able to make the journey and be sustained along the way. So Amanda and I got to go to Alaska this past year, 2018. Such a relaxing change of pace experience. One of the things we came across up there was a gold rush in the Yukon Territory. And the people heard about the gold rush. It was at a bad economic time in America, and people started flocking up there to go see if they could get part of the action. Just like the gold rush that happened in the U.S., this one happened in the Yukon Territory. If you understand Canada at all, there is a ton of mountainous, cold nothing. I mean, that's a lot of what Canada is. Mountainous, cold nothing. And these people would flock up to the Yukon Territory, and they would go out and they'd start traveling across the mountains to get to where the gold was found, and they didn't supply themselves enough. They didn't bring enough food. They didn't bring enough water, and they would die. Half of the people that went on the Yukon gold rush died. So much so that the Canadian Mounted Police, the police that are on the horses, made a checkpoint and said, if you come to this checkpoint without enough supply to last at least a year, we're turning you back. You got to go home. The Canadian Mounted Police became the common sense for that Yukon gold rush. So they would stop finding groups of dead people all along the path. We understand this concept in weight loss. We all know the key to permanent weight loss is a lifestyle change. Not temporarily changing our diet to shed a few pounds, but changing our approach to food so that we can keep those few pounds off. And then living that differently for the rest of our life, knowing that if we just go on a temporary weight loss, what's going to happen after the diet? Come right back. So we understand that key physically. Why don't we plan this way for our spiritual life? If you want to lose spiritual weight, you have to have a spiritual lifestyle change. You can't consume the same things you were consuming when you were out of shape spiritually and expect to get in shape spiritually. I went over this last time I got to speak, I think. What is our goal? What are the steps we'll have to take to achieve our goal? What things do we need to remove in our life to affect the change that we desire? For our weight, Brother John and I have talked about this a lot. We remove soda. If you don't understand, soda is a really bad thing to losing weight. It's horrible for you. So, lifestyle change, we take soda out and we make a little bit of progress. We understand this concept for physical weight loss. Why don't we do this spiritually? You want to get yourself better spiritually? Eric, you don't get to be a part of this discussion. Not the physical weight loss stuff. I have no hate, I have kindness. Be merciful. What is your spiritual soda? The unhealthy habit that keeps the spirit from being able to shed unrighteous habits. What's your spiritual soda? What is it that you do that you know this is just bad for me, but I'm just going to keep doing it because I don't want to lose this? It's comfortable. It's enjoyable. It's what my flesh likes. For many, it's the idea of forgiveness. If you look in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6, you know what happens in verse 6? Matthew chapter 6. Let's turn there. Matthew chapter 6. Start in verse 8. Somebody yell out when you figure out what is in Matthew chapter 6. Just yell out. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him. After this manner therefore pray ye. Our Father which art in heaven. Somebody's got to know by now. The Lord's Prayer comes right after Matthew chapter 5 at the end, where Christ tells you to be perfect. You know what's in the Lord's Prayer that, well, let's read it. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. You know what keeps us from experiencing grace the way we're intended to experience grace and the way we're supposed to exhibit grace? This concept of forgiveness. Does Christ hold it against you, the offenses you've done against him? No, that's called grace. It's how you're supposed to live with each other. You're supposed to forgive others, even as Christ has forgiven you. But yet we want to keep this anger and bitterness towards one another. Why don't we decide we're going to make a conscious habit out of forgiving people? And it might take a while for it to take root. But we're willing to go on spiritual or physical lifestyle changes. Can you go on a spiritual lifestyle change? Can you decide to make habits spiritually that are going to help you shed unrighteous things out of your life? I want to walk in the fleshly habit of forgiveness or not forgiving and try to achieve spiritual lifestyle change in another part of my life. You want to understand why it is you can't get rid of this spiritual thing that drags you down. This habit, this activity that you do that I just want to be done with this. I want to get over this. But you have unhealthy, unrighteous habits as a part of your life. You want to know what you need to do? You probably already know. But I want to break it down even further. Make a habit out of being forgiving. Make a habit out of being forgiving. How can you do that? First off, you start with God and you ask him, and then you actually do it with man. Someone's offended you. Forgive them. Walk up to them and say, I forgive you. I held this against you. I shouldn't have. It's hurting me. I forgive you. What can you take out of your life and surrender to God so that you can go on your spiritual journey? What is it that's keeping you from living out grace the way you're intended to live out grace? What spiritual lifestyle change do you need to work on so that you can grow spiritually? My challenge to you is to make it a habit, make it a daily activity. Not just, oh, I heard a message and yeah, it was right, I know what to do. But then say, okay, so I'm going to take this activity out of my life and I'm going to have a spiritual lifestyle change. I don't know what it is, but God and you can figure it out. What is it you need to change? Are you going to be gracious to those around you? Are you going to be merciful to those around you? Are you going to allow Christ to mature you into a complete tool so that you can be what you're intended to be? Is your lifestyle going to change? Or are you just going to keep living the same lifestyle, having the same unhealthy spiritual life? Christ is looking at you first and saying, you change. Don't worry about so-and-so and what they did to you. You change. You be merciful. You show kindness. You be gracious. But they don't. You. Because it's who you are, because Christ has been gracious to you. And he's asking you to live like me. Who are you going to reflect today? Who are you going to show today? We don't mind putting clothes on that identify us with a certain ball team. We don't mind putting stuff on that says, hey, I like this fashion person. We're going to put on Christ so that we can reflect who Christ is to us. You know what he's done for you. Are you going to reflect that to others? Christ in me, the hope of glory. What are you going to be first? Just a victim of your circumstances? Or are you going to be gracious? Is that going to be who you are? You're going to be kind. Is that going to be who you are? Are you going to reflect the love of Christ? That's the question. Every head bowed, every eye closed. If you don't know the love of Christ personally, you're not familiar with what he did for you on a cross and the sin that he's taken and paid for himself.